including, quote, the extraordinary emphasis on speed over quality of screening, end of quote. The deputy said that this whistleblower highlighted, quote, what many felt was unreasonable reliance on a metric system that was oftentimes beautiful in full-color presentation on slide decks, but was very detached from the reality of the front line where the actions were taking place, end of quote. The deputy also confirmed what we have heard many times before, that TSA has abused the SSI designation to cover up information. He joked that in the early years of the agency, quote, you could mark, and I think the chairman referred to this, you could mark a Chinese carry-out menu SSI, end of quote. He added, quote, a brochure or something that was clearly public, consumable material or information you could get on the internet or in the library, and they would, you know, stamp it SSI, end of quote. Now, from everything we have seen, TSA operations have improved over the last 2 years under most recent administrator, Vice Admiral Peter Neffinger. But the deputy's interview last week makes crystal clear that TSA employees need the same protections as other federal employees so they can speak up about the security of American people without being retaliated against. And Congress can consider these reforms. And let me say to the chairman, I thank you again, and I thank all of our members for standing up for whistleblowers. Ladies and gentlemen, if we don't stand up for whistleblowers, we don't need to be here. We need to go and get another job, because as far as I'm concerned, it would be legislative and congressional malpractice not to do so. Some of the best information that we have gotten from whistleblowers, and we must do everything in our power at all times to protect them. And on the other hand, for anyone who thinks Congress should receive Title V protection for employees at other federal agencies, TSA is a case study demonstrating why this would be a terrible idea. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back. I also noticed that Congressman Sarbanes just came in, and he's one of our newest members. Thank you.
Welcome. Thank you. Glad you're here. Members are advised that we do anticipate votes on the floor. We're going to get through hopefully get through all of the opening statements, but at the appropriate time we will break. The intention is to allow the votes on the floor, and then we'll come back and finish up the hearing. We'll hold the record open for 5 legislative days for any members who'd like to submit a written statement. But let's now recognize our panel. We're pleased to welcome Ms. Gawadia. She's the Acting Administrator for the Transportation Security Administration. The Honorable John Roth, Inspector General for the United States Department of Homeland Security, and the Honorable Carolyn Lerner, a Special Counsel for the Office of Special Counsel. Special Counsel for the United States Office of Special Counsel. We welcome you all. Pursuant to committee rules, you are to be sworn before you testify. So if you will please rise and raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? So help you God. Thank you. Please be seated and let the record reflect that all of the witnesses answered in the affirmative. We would appreciate it if you would limit your oral testimony to 5 minutes. We'll give you a little bit of latitude, but of course your entire written statement will be made part of the record. We'll now recognize the Acting Administrator for 5 minutes. And by the way, you have to straighten it up and get that microphone right up in there. It's a little uncomfortable, but bring it up close. Thank you.
Good morning, Chairman Chaffetz, Ranking Member Cummings, and distinguished members of the committee. Thank you for affording me the opportunity and privilege to speak to you today about information transparency at the Transportation Security Administration. I am indeed fortunate to represent a tremendous workforce that is responsible for executing a critical security mission to protect the nation's transportation systems. Vital to that mission's success is how we share information with our many transportation security partners. The dynamic and increasingly complex threat environment in which we operate demands that TSA and our partners share information in a timely and secure manner. To that end, we work closely across the spectrum of transportation modes to exchange information, solicit feedback, and develop policy and guidelines. Indeed, our recent cooperative initiatives with industry stakeholders have yielded significant improvements to our security operations. For instance, we collaborated with airports and air carriers to address the surge in passenger volumes last spring and summer. And in the process, we established our Airport Operations Center as a permanent and direct communication channel. Leveraging the center, TSA continues to hold daily calls with airlines and airports to track screening operations. We also communicate regularly with the traveling public through a variety of outreach efforts, press releases, and social media. TSA Cares and at Ask TSA are two of our most popular and successful models of passenger engagement. But the transportation security system does not stop at our borders. It is undeniably global in nature. That is why TSA works alongside partners and plays a leading role in a number of regional and international organizations with a common vision for transportation security. Across all our interactions, TSA strives to be transparent and forthright. In point of fact, doing so serves our interest, as a free and frequent exchange of information to and from partners helps us make better informed decisions and build lasting trust. However, we also must remain absolutely vigilant in safeguarding against the release of sensitive information which could cause harm if disclosed to our adversaries. We must balance the transparent flow of information with our serious responsibility to prevent that information from falling into the wrong hands. For that reason, we ensure that information requiring protection is properly marked, handled, and distributed. Sensitive security information, or SSI, is one category of protected information that is defined by statute. Governing departmental and TSA management directives mandate that such information be released to the maximum extent possible without compromising transportation security. And because we count on our greatest resource, our people, to enforce these protections, we have updated SSI training and made it an annual requirement for all TSA employees and contractors. In addition, we have developed a comprehensive SSI policies and procedures handbook, as well as improved reference guides. Keeping with the spirit of transparency and preserving the public's access to appropriate information, TSA also follows established procedures for adjudicating challenges to SSI designations. Taken together, these measures enhance the SSI program and contribute to TSA's overall growth as a true learning organization. We must also continue to learn from each other. I encourage my TSA colleagues to feel empowered in voicing their thoughts, suggestions, and concerns that can lead to improvements in our workplace environment and how we do business. That means creating and sustaining an organizational culture which values responsible challenges to conventional thinking and invites opportunities to get better. And those opportunities can come from a number of sources, be it an audit conducted by the Inspector General or an employee calling attention to an agency impropriety. I want to take this opportunity to thank Mr. Roth and Ms. Lerner for the efforts of their offices. With their help, I do believe we will continue to improve. Let me stress that no matter where the challenge comes from, TSA has zero tolerance for prohibited personnel practices, such as retaliation against whistleblowers. TSA is fortunate to have employees and stakeholders with a shared passion for mission success and integrity. We will continue to work hard to exceed their expectations. In conclusion, I would like to emphasize that each side of the coin, sharing information transparently and protecting information when it is required, is indispensable to our national security mission. I have every confidence that the proud men and women of TSA today are more than up to both tasks. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Before we recognize the Inspector General, members are advised we have a vote on the floor. So I'm going to put us into recess, and we will reconvene no sooner than 11 a.m. So you're free to go to the cafeteria, do whatever you want to do. We'll be no sooner than 11, but if you'd please be back here just before 11, and as soon as the votes are done on the floor, we'll reconvene.
All right, folks. So the vote that they're talking about, I think it's going to be for what's his name, Dr. Ben Carson. I'm not 100% sure, but we do have footage of the Senate floor where they are debating the confirmation of Dr. Ben Carson. So just give me a few minutes and I'll put it up on the screen. If you haven't yet, President Trump is set to speak today at the USS Gerald Ford. It's a warship, Navy warship. He's going to be speaking about ramping up the military and giving them more ways of being able to engage more in the war, at war. So make sure to go in the description. Also, it's on the chat. Click on it, go give it a thumbs up, share it, and set the notification. It happens in just a few hours, so go and check out the link. But like I said, I'll put up the footage of the vote for Dr. Ben Carson in just a few minutes.
Mr. Gardner, aye. Mr. Lee, aye. Ms. Murkowski, aye. Ms. Collins, aye. Mr. Thune, aye. Mr. Barrasso, aye. Ms. Klobuchar, no. Mr. King, aye. Mr. Alexander, aye. Ms. Baldwin, no. Mr. Sullivan, aye. Mr. Bennett, no. Mr. Carper, no. Mr. Whitehouse, no. Mr. Daines, aye. Mr. Coons, no. Mr. Scott, aye. Mr. Rubio, aye. Mr. Langford, aye. Mr. Corker, aye. Mr. Paul, aye. Mr. Moran. Aye.
And ask, are there any senators in the chamber wishing to vote or wishing to change? Wait a minute. Because we're not at 100?
We're not at 100.
I'll walk you through it, and then we'll announce the yeas, the nays, and then...
Perfect. Okay. Senators wishing to vote. Are there any senators in the chamber wishing to vote or to change their vote? If not, the yeas are 58. Nays are 41. And the nomination is confirmed.
Mr. President,
Majority Leader.
I move to reconsider the vote on the nomination, and I move to table the motion to reconsider.
The question is on the motion to table. All of those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, no. Ayes appear to have it. Ayes do have it. Motion is agreed to. Under the previous order, there will now be 10 minutes of debate equally divided.
Mr. President, I yield back the time.
Is there objection? Without objection, all time is yielded back. Clerk will report the motion to invoke cloture.
Cloture motion. We, the undersigned senators, in accordance with the provisions of Rule 22 of the Standing Rules of the Senate, do hereby move to bring to a close debate on the nomination of James Richard Perry to be Secretary of Energy, signed by 17 senators.
By unanimous consent, the mandatory quorum call has been waived. The question is it the sense of the Senate that debate on the nomination of James Richard Perry of Texas to be Secretary of Energy shall be brought to a close? The yeas and nays are mandatory under the rule. Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander, Ms. Baldwin, Mr. Barrasso. Mr. Bennett. Mr. Blumenthal. Mr. Blunt. Mr. Booker, Mr. Bozeman, Mr. Brown, Mr. Burr, Ms. Cantwell, Mrs. Capito, Mr. Cardin, Mr. Carper, Mr. Casey, Mr. Cassidy, Mr. Cochran, Ms. Collins, Mr. Coons, Ms. Cortez Masto, Mr. Cotton, Mr. Crapo, Mr. Cruz, Mr. Daines, Mr. Donnelly, Ms. Duckworth,
Senator
Mr. Durbin, Mr. Enzi, Mrs. Ernst, Mrs. Feinstein, Mr. Flake, Mr. Franken, Mr. Gardner, Mrs. Gillibrand, Mr. Graham, Mr. Grassley, Ms. Harris, Ms. Hassan, Mr. Hatch, Mr. Heinrich, Ms. Heitkamp, Mr. Heller, Ms. Hirono, Mr. Hoven, Mr. Inhofe, Mr. Isaacson, Mr. Johnson, Mr. Kane, Mr. Kennedy, Mr. King, Ms. Klobuchar, Mr. Langford, Mr. Leahy, Mr. Lee, Mr. Manchin, Mr. Markey, Mr. McCain, Mrs. McCaskill, Mr. McConnell, Mr. Menendez, Mr. Merkley, Mr. Moran, Ms. Murkowski, Mr. Murphy, Mrs. Murray, Mr. Nelson, Mr. Paul, Mr. Perdue, Mr. Peters, Mr. Portman, Mr. Reed, Mr. Risch, Mr. Roberts, Mr. Rounds, Mr. Rubio, Mr. Sanders, Mr. Sass, Mr. Schatz, Mr. Schumer, Mr. Scott, Mrs. Shaheen, Mr. Shelby, Ms. Stabenow, Mr. Strange, Mr. Sullivan, Mr. Tester, Mr. Thune, Mr. Tillis, Mr. Toomey, Mr. Udall, Mr. Van Hollen, Mr. Warner, Ms. Warren, Mr. Whitehouse, Mr. Wicker, Mr. Wyden, Mr. Young. Senators voting in the affirmative: Alexander, Barrasso, Blunt, Bozeman, Burr, Capito, Cardin, Cassidy, Cochran, Collins, Corker, Cornyn, Cortez Masto, Cotton, Crapo, Cruz, Daines, Donnelly, Enzi, Ernst, Fisher, Flake, Gardner, Heitkamp, Heller, Hoven, Inhofe, Johnson, Kennedy, King, Langford, Lee, Manchin, McCain, McCaskill, McConnell, Moran, Paul, Perdue, Risch, Roberts, Rounds, Rubio, Sass, Scott, Shelby, Stabenow, Strange, Tillis, Toomey, Udall, Warner, Young. Mr. Murkowski, aye.
Fill up that chair.
Senators voting in the negative: Baldwin, Bennett, Blumenthal, Booker, Brown, Cantwell, Carper, Casey, Coons, Duckworth, Feinstein, Franken, Gillibrand, Harris, Hassan, Heinrich, Hirono, Kane, Klobuchar, Leahy, Markey, Menendez, Merkley, Murphy, Murray, Peters, Reed, Sanders, Schumer, Shaheen, Van Hollen, Warren, Whitehouse, Wyden. Mr. Sullivan. Mr. Sullivan, aye. Mr. Grassley. Mr. Grassley, aye. Mr. Nelson. Mr. Nelson, no. Mr. Tester, aye. Mr. Portman, aye. Mr. Durbin, no. Graham. Mr. Graham, aye. Mr. Wicker. Mr. Wicker, aye. Mr. Schatz, Mr. Schatz. No. Mr. Hatch, Mr. Hatch. Aye. Mr. Thune. Mr. Thune. Aye.
On this vote, the ayes are 62, the nays are 37. The motion is agreed to. The clerk will report the nomination.
Nomination, Department of Energy, James Richard Perry of Texas to be Secretary.
Mr. President.
Senator from Vermont.
Mr. President, I'll speak briefly because I know the distinguished senior senator from Alaska is waiting to speak, but and I ask consent to be able to speak as though in morning business.
Without objection.
President, I wonder each day what's going to happen, because every day we learn more about the troubling connections between the Russian government and both President Trump's administration but his campaign. But last night, it kind of topped everything. A revelation that Attorney General Sessions met with Russian officials during the height of the presidential campaign. That raises a new level of alarm. And one of the reasons it does is we know that the Attorney General, under oath, misled the Senate Judiciary Committee in response to my direct question about his contacts with Russian officials. I asked then Senator Sessions if he had been in contact with anyone connected to any part of the Russian government about the 2016 election. His answer was unequivocal. He said no. He provided a similar misleading response to Senator Franken, saying he was not aware of any connections between the Trump campaign and the Russian government. Now, I think we already, and those of us who, especially lawyers, who have had a chance to serve as Attorney General or prosecutor in our states, we know it's an egregious breach of public trust. The Attorney General Sessions has not recused himself from this investigation. I think everybody would agree he has to recuse himself. But now, of course, as this goes on, the questions rise, has he perjured himself? In response to these reports, the Attorney General claims he never met Russian officials to discuss issues of the campaign. And that's a wholly inadequate response. The Attorney General was a top advisor to the Trump campaign. He had a private, undisclosed meeting with the Russian ambassador during the height of concerns about Russian involvement in our election. Think about it. We're having reports everywhere about concerns about Russian involvements in the elections in the United States. He has an undisclosed meeting with the Russian ambassador. He also met with the Russian ambassador during an event of the Republican National Convention. One would think at the Republican National Convention, it's possible politics might be discussed. Now, if the Attorney General thinks his explanation is sufficient after he misled Congress about these contacts, of course he's mistaken. And I don't say that as a Democrat. I think everybody would agree to that. But what I worry about, the Attorney General is only the latest Trump administration official attempting to mask contacts with the Kremlin. The president's first national security advisor lied to the vice president about his communications with the Russian ambassador. He only resigned after the media reported how he had lied to Vice President Pence. And even that was weeks after the president had been informed. So he had to leave only when it became public. And the president's chief of staff attempted to use the FBI, which of course would be in violation of Justice Department policies, to suppress news reports about Russian contacts. Mr. President, I've been here 7 previous presidents, Republicans and Democrats, you assume they played by the rules. This administration seems to want to make up the rules. But the thing is, this is not my concern is not just what the administration might be doing. My concern is about Russia. We are, I believe, strongly the greatest democracy history has known. We are the longest existing democracy in history. And now we have Russia meddling and trying to undermine our democracy. Every American should worry about that. Every American should be frightened, not just concerned, but frightened. It's an attack on our democracy. This is one of the most disturbing national security challenges facing our country. Russian President Putin ordered a multifaceted campaign aimed at helping Donald Trump win, but also in undermining faith in our election. That should alarm and outrage everybody, no matter what party you belong to. But we didn't hear a word about it during the president's speech on Tuesday to the joint session of Congress. In fact, the president's only reaction has been to disparage American investigators, to disparage the intelligence community, to cast journalists who report on this as, quote, enemies of the American people. Well, I tell everybody the journalists are not enemies of the American people. Russia is the enemy of the American people. Putin is the enemy of the American people. Don't cast our journalists. Don't cast our investigators. Don't cast our intelligence people. Don't cast those who dare speak out as being enemies of America. Point to the real enemies, Vladimir Putin and those he controls. And it's about time we take this seriously. I've been here 42 years. I have never seen such a perfidious threat on our democracy as what we're seeing from Vladimir Putin. And my concern is the administration doesn't call it for what it is. We Americans deserve to know the facts. We deserve a full and fair investigation. We deserve one that's free from any political influence. I've repeatedly called on Attorney General Sessions, who was one of President Trump's top advisors during the campaign, to recuse himself, appoint a special counsel, conduct the investigation. Earlier this week, he said, I would recuse myself on anything that I should recuse myself on. This morning he said he would recuse himself whenever it's appropriate. This would be a ludicrous response from a law clerk at the Department of Justice. From the Attorney General, it is dissembling. Recusal is not optional here. It's required by very clear Justice Department regulations. It's required in order to maintain at least a semblance of integrity in this investigation. Attorney General has to recuse himself because, as stated clearly in department rules, he's obviously closely identified with the president due to his service as a principal advisor. That's the rule. That was the rule, whether it's a Republican or Democratic administration. It describes his relationship with the president. The investigation has to be led by someone who, in reality and in appearance, is impartial, removed from politics. That's not describing someone who was in the trenches of a political campaign with the subjects of the investigation, while they're allegedly engaged in the very activity under investigation. And it doesn't describe somebody who misled Congress, misled the Republican-led Senate Judiciary Committee about his own activities, and he's been implicated in the investigation. It's not a close call. It's not a close call. When we know that Russia is doing everything to undermine our democracy, let's stand up for America. Let's do what's best for our country. Attorney General should start by stepping aside. But then what we need is an independent investigation and answers. And I thank the distinguished senior senator from Alaska for her indulgence. I yield the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President,
Senator from Alaska.
Thank you. The matter pending before the Senate this morning is the nomination of Rick Perry to be Secretary of Energy, and I have come to the floor this morning to speak to that nomination. As with Representative Zinke, who we confirmed to be Secretary of the Interior just yesterday, I am equally proud to support Governor Perry's nomination. And I know that colleagues from both sides of the aisle will be joining me as we make a statement in support of this individual to our new president's cabinet. A little bit on Governor Perry's background. He is one who has devoted his life, literally decades of his life, to public service. After graduating from Texas A&M, he joined the U.S. Air Force. He piloted C-130 tactical aircraft in Europe as well as the Middle East. He's served as a state representative, as agriculture commissioner, lieutenant governor, and of course, governor of Texas. And during his time as governor, Rick Perry showed that economic growth and environmental stewardship can not only survive and coexist, but they can really thrive. Over the course of 14 years, Texas added 2.2 million jobs, saw its population grow by more than 6 million people, and at the same time that you have this robust growth within your state's population, the state reduced its carbon dioxide emissions by 17%. Reduced its sulfur dioxide emissions by 56%, and reduced their nitrous oxide emissions by 66%. So in most states where you have a considerable plus up in your population, a growing economy, you also see growing levels of impact, growing levels of emission, but Governor Perry dealt with this head on, and we saw the results over the course of 14 years in the state of Texas. He led an effort to decommission older and dirtier power plants. He prioritized the development of emerging and innovative technologies, including carbon sequestration and capture. And as a result of his leadership there in the state of Texas, that state now leads our nation in producing more wind energy than all but 5 other countries. So think about it that way. Coming from the state of Alaska, as you and I do, Mr. President, we recognize that you're kind of labeled. We're labeled as an oil state. Well, Texas certainly has been oil.
All right, folks, we're going to be shutting down this stream for just a few minutes. We'll pull up another stream in like I said, in just a few minutes. Vice President Mike Pence is set to speak at Frame USA. It's a company that makes windows, frames, doors, all that good stuff. It's made in the USA. Vice President Mike Pence is set to speak there regarding jobs, the economy, and the importance of materials and stuff being made here in the USA. Now, before that, House Speaker Paul Ryan is going to hold a weekly news briefing. So, like I said, we'll shut this stream down in just a few minutes, and we'll pull up the one for Vice President Mike Pence. After Vice President Mike Pence is finished, the President of the United States, Donald Trump, will be speaking at the USS Gerald Ford. It's a Navy warship that is being unveiled, I guess, and he is going to speak there regarding a few topics, including ramping up, military forces and materials and Navy ships and all kinds of stuff that he wants to ramp up production of, including a $250 billion addition to the military. So, he's going to be speaking about a few things. I put the link for that is in the description below. So make sure you go over there, you give it a thumbs up, you share it, and you set the notification. It's coming in just a few hours. So again, Speaker Paul Ryan coming up next. Then after that is Vice President Mike Pence. And then after that is President Donald Trump. So please join us, share it around, and we hope to see you guys on chat. Thank you very much.